Graham, thanks for having me, everybody. Have we got people in from all over the country then? Obviously, Great Dunmouse, Somerset,
Yeah,
uh,
I
Caution,
I
yeah, all over
confess
the
not
place.
remembering where Hadstock is. So, John, my apologies to you if for my ignorance.
So I am in Norwich, in North Norwich. Uh, sorry, North Norfolk, near Norwich, and I am doing the first. So this is the first of these presentations where I'm talking to people about community resilience. I've been working for the National Trust for the last 8 years, but the last couple of years have been in a sort of conservation management role, doing river restoration on the Upper Bure River in Norfolk, and the role that I had was in community outreach and engagement. I've got scientific training, I've got sociology training as well. So I was doing a lot of community listening through my time with Riverlands and trying to understand what it is that the community wanted, and in terms of land use and land use change. So we did a lot of speaking to people uh, about the issues they see in the countryside and rural communities. And through the course of doing that work, I developed this presentation. Just having a little bit of trouble with my second screen, trying to get the. Might have to share my screen and see how you find it. This is always a little bit nerve wracking to to do this. So if I get.
You have a nice picture of me at the moment. Yep, you're getting there.
All right, so I've got. Just unplug that second screen.
It's looking good.
And what I can't see now is my
Where
notes.
you are, yes. Right, you're on the first slide, Geoff. That helps.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, this is. You can tell it's the first time, can't you? Um, I just need to be able to see. Oh God, now it's giving me. Never mind. Let's not do that. Okay. What I might just have to do is have it all out in the open, so you can see all my notes as well. I hope that's okay with everybody.
Usually, if you pull it from your second screen to your first, then the system
Yeah.
plays better ball than it does with the second screen.
Normally, it gives me a little box in the bottom, a bit like this, but in a better format that allows me to read it. But anyway, I'll stop worrying about that, and you can see what I'm getting at anyway. So we'll make do for the moment, and I'll replace my screen sometime soon. So as part of the outcomes of the project I was working on, um, I have. I'm finishing that role in that project, and with my redundancy money, I'm setting up a community interest company called Novel Mosaic. The purpose of that is to deliver talks like this, and this is a sort of thing I've got booked in for the next few months around Norfolk, around the catchment, is talking to community groups to talk to them about something I learned whilst I was doing all of the other work streams that I've been doing, which is deep adaptation, which I'll come on to in a minute. Um, the the output of that will then be to support community groups with resilience projects, to start to put together things like the desktop surveys of figuring out what you have in your community and where the gaps are, and then putting together projects to try to bring community groups together and to support resilience projects. And then other work streams that sort of feed into that will be creating edible landscapes like edible parks, and forest edge design gardens and things like that, and restoring habitat, which is what I've been doing in my role. So I've called this catchment adaptation. It was specifically called Bure adaptation because it was aimed at the Bure catchment. Um, But what this is essentially is the key messages and the actions and the sort of outcomes of a couple of pieces of cross-disciplinary climate science and climate work and sociology, written by Professor Jem Bendell from Cumbria University, who wrote a book called Breaking Together, following on from a paper that he wrote called Deep Adaptation, both of which are along the lines of, you know, all the things we're doing nationally and internationally to change or to do anything about carbon and climate change and the poly crisis are not meeting their targets, as we repeatedly see. And what people need to do is to start to prepare for collapse by adapting our communities, our lives, and our minds to a different form of community organization. So you see the picture on the cover of the book there is of Atlas carrying the Earth, but it's the Kintsugi gold repair version of that, where if you know anything about that Japanese practice, is as something breaks and you repair it with gold to make it stronger and to make it more beautiful and more meaningful. So that's sort of inside and out with people and communities. That is what the aim of this whole process is. Any questions before I jump into it? Is everyone still there?
Yeah, press on, Geoff. Press on.
Grand.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can't see anybody, just so you know. So if you do have any questions, just shout out, and yeah, we'll stop and have a chat.
Okay.
So I believe you had a talk recently from one of the founders of the transition movement about how we got here. So I won't linger too long on it. But needless to say, it's all developing very quickly, and we're already in a world. Looking back over that planetary boundaries timeline, in 2015, I'd not long started to learn about ecology and conservation, having come out of university in 2008, and by 2023, I had a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and last year we started to see that we've been above 1.5 globally, above 1.5 degrees over pre-industrial emissions for the second year in a row. So it's developing very quickly as an issue, and it's not going to get any better without us doing something that is very different from what we've been doing, trying to do, or failing to do. So we have a reality to face as a planet and as communities, as individuals, that we have to be honest about, and we have to take a courageous approach to look that situation in the eye. The traditional approaches have been insufficient, and we know that, and we do need to support each other with this, because it's a difficult truth to come to terms with on an emotional level, and there is fallout when people come to terms with difficult truths in a personal and psychological way. So we have to be different to each other. I can provide all of these links afterwards, but the 4 pillars to the framework that is set out in these books is resilience, relinquishment, restoration, and reconciliation. Resilience, which is mostly what we'll be focusing on in this, is building that community strength and adaptability, things that are good in any scenario, even if none of it was true, and we could carry on living in the way that we're living globally for another 100, thousand years, it is a good idea to build community resilience and strength and be adaptable. So that's where we are going to start. Relinquishment is letting go of the unsustainable expectations, the idea of perpetual economic growth, that the state is, or businesses even, are going to have our best interests at heart and are going to do the best things for us to get us out of the situation that we're in. Restoration, so reviving the skills and things that made our communities unique, and self-sustaining. So things like growing food and making our own power, generating our own power, which is a lot easier now than it ever has been, and reconciliation. So rebuilding trust with the people in our community, especially the people that are different from us. So what we're looking at in a sort of abstract concept is moving away from a centralized way of organizing our society to a distributed way of organizing it. So if you imagine that your community where you are is one of the, if you can see my cursor, one of the nodes at the end of a long stick, quite far away from the middle of power. That's how our food system works, our power generation works, our governance. A lot of these things happen to us rather than us having a say in what goes on in the world. Decentralized is better. We're more aware of our surroundings, but what we need is short supply chains and short distribution to other communities and other resources and other means of being resilient and adaptable. I'll take you through some of this stuff in more detail with some examples. So food security is something that we are particularly vulnerable in the UK. As you probably all know from recent headlines after the invasion of Iran, that food prices are going to spike along with energy prices, as we always find. But people like Tim Lang, who's been looking into this for a long time, know that we have a particularly low self-sufficiency of food, of all the food that we need in this country, and we import an awful lot. We import just under half, I think. So one of the things that I've been doing in my project, and that I really want to continue doing as a CIC, is to change land use and change the landscape to make market gardening and short supply chains a normal thing. At least in my local community, if not across the country. What that does is put people back in the landscape, put skills back in the landscape, change the conversation between rural people and town people, and put that sort of resilience in a more spread out way across our communities, so that there are multiple places to go, and take away that third party that sits between the food producers and the consumers, and that take quite a lot of money out of it, and created quite a fragile system that's open to shocks. There's a number of things that can be done. It's not just food growing, but food preservation. Local skills like that are very, very useful. Seed saving, tool libraries, and all sorts of other schemes to assist people with what they need. There are a number of places that are already doing this. So Land Workers Alliance are a group of people that you may already know that work nationally to support market gardeners, small scale horticulturalists, smallholders, small craftspeople, things like that. And they have regional hubs, and you can approach them directly and get a pretty good idea about who's doing what in your local area. It's a very different group of people to farmers. So they are usually younger, it's not difficult in the farming sector to be younger because the issues they're facing. But they're usually early career entrants that are politicised and would like to make a different sort of world for themselves and have some amount of anxiety about the future themselves. Sitter Slow is Spanish for slow city. It's a movement around making sure that your local outlets are producing and supplying local food that's responsibly grown and that it is as unprocessed as possible. We have one locally to us in Aylsham, and slow food movements are part of the transition groups as well. They go hand in hand a lot. And then there's things like community foundations that sort of support in terms of administrative help and help with civic assets, meeting spaces, food banks sometimes as well. And a lot of universities, our local university in Norwich has Sustainable Food Norwich as a sort of a branch of their interdisciplinary projects and research. Anglia Ruskin in Cambridge have a similar thing. Cambridge University have a similar thing. I'm pretty sure most universities that do anything in humanities, geography, or life sciences would do something similar as well that can connect into local groups. And of course, the transition movement, which is one of the places where I started with Transition Cambridge, is tons and tons of different projects. As far as I'm experienced, lots of different projects that span lots of quite a disparate range of communities and activities. Alternative economics, you may have come across this sort of thing as well, is to remove that middle person who isn't in your community, that takes a little bit of every transaction and removes it from your community to the other side of the world. There are ways around that. Things like local currencies have been trialled with some of the transition towns, and or just paying in cash can be a very useful thing to do to keep wealth in the community, and to stop that wealth being eroded with every transaction that occurs. And things like skills exchanges. I don't know whether anyone's familiar with things like repair cafes. They can be as small or as big as you want to make them, and be a hub for any sort of community skills exchanges as well. And things like gardens, meeting spaces, local support, local transport to support people that are unable to move around, like car shares and community taxis and that sort of thing. The idea is to regenerate nature and culture together. So to sort of rewrite our stories about our local communities through all this interaction and this activity, and to understand that all of these things that exist and these relationships that exist all have a reliance on nature, on natural capital of some sort, and to build that into the way that we organize ourselves and that we interact with each other. We need to, part of that is rejecting some of that top-down stuff around environmental issues. Carbon footprint is one of the things that is a particularly on my radar at the moment, as my local climate emergency group are focusing on carbon footprints of individuals, which isn't really an appropriate measure for how to change behavior and how to rebuild and adapt. Its carbon footprint is maybe quite useful for countries or large businesses, but as individuals, it sort of obfuscates the issue somewhat and puts the responsibility on people consuming the right things rather than doing something that is outside of our current system. Embracing voluntary cooperation, that's the examples that we've just seen, amongst community groups and community-led initiatives and businesses. Every town and area has some of this stuff. It's just a case of finding out what it is, where it is, and supporting them. Most towns as well, most communities have some sort of conservation management group, whether that's doing woodland work, working on rivers, doing tree planting or gardening or looking after verges or something. They're good hubs of people that want to become active to do something good in their local area and are using the energy that they have to do something good. And that's something that once you start to realize the sort of the problems we're facing, quite a lot of anxiety tends to come out of that, and physical activity is very good for directing that in a creative and constructive way, that allows people to connect with other people and find that support network that they need to get through that anxiety. And the last one, preserving cultural traditions and adapting to new realities. I think in England particularly, we have quite a big gap between the version of our country that was close to the land and understood the seasons and understood how the land works and how the ecology works and had stories around that, rituals, food and festivals around it. That is not something that we can see very easily these days in England. It's easier to see in other countries, but we can recreate these things. We can borrow with pride from other cultures that have these ways of understanding the earth that they're standing on, and we can tell stories and create new stories, which is critical for creating meaning, out of the issues that are coming down the line. So this all sort of rests on the core values of what we want to do, and it's sort of a radical kindness. We want to be able to meet every challenge with the understanding that we are all going through a similar thing, maybe not in a similar way, but we all are facing challenges that are unique to our time in human history and are big and overwhelming, and that we all need compassion and we all need support in doing that. However that sort of appears to us or is presented to us. Maybe if in terms of acting with integrity, maybe you're somebody who will want to just get on and do something regardless of what that is, and it is always important to have a sense of communing with other people and taking information in before we do anything just to sort of be active. And so practicing being generous and being prioritizing your community well-being over your individual needs is very important. And it's a way of practicing generosity and reciprocity with those around you. And like I said, practical work can help maintain your mental health and your ability to adapt to these situations. But practical work with others is the best way. So just to sort of recap the things we need to let go of. Expectations of perpetual economic growth, as we're seeing now, and we'll see more in the future, dependence on fragile chains of supply across the planet, and lifestyles that exhaust our resources. So it's an awful lot to ask of people, and it's one that will have a lot of argument in the opposite direction. But there is no time for delay, really. And I think it's easier. It's probably the best way to work with the people that are on side and have that ability to put in some effort with you, and the people that are arguing against it will come around eventually. I think it's important that we understand how much time we need to spend on trying to convince people of realities that are maybe not ready to take on. But we can do that ourselves and sort of lead by example. So one of the things there is we have no right above any other person or animal to a continuation of our life stories, and that is a harsh but real fact that what is happening to our planet is a physical, complex, dynamic problem that is in no way invested in what we are interested in life, and what we find valuable, and it will continue to do what it needs to do as with the energy that we've put into that system, and we have to adapt to it. And this isn't to say that we shouldn't be slowing down or stopping our emissions entirely. We absolutely should, but there is a lot baked in that we need to adapt to. So I've just put in some sort of project style steps. So the things that communities can do immediately is connect with neighbours, identify spaces to meet, identify local skills and resources, and build relationships. I'd probably start with something like a desktop survey of understanding how many growers you have locally, how many locally supplied outlets, or bakers or butchers or people that can do those sorts of practical skills that support communities, and then start to ground truth it and start to go out and meet people, make those connections, to see where those gaps are, where those people don't exist anymore, or understand what people's challenges are, what their business is and their charities and their organizations are like, and what they need from each other, what's stopping them from doing more, and then to identify opportunities to fill those gaps and to deal with vulnerabilities in your community. And then as you go forward in time, less and less detail gets filled in at this point, but you would fill it in as you go. So as you understand those things about your community, you can start to build plans and map these things out and start to lobby local government for backup systems, for infrastructure, for other sort of assets, for other community assets that are missing. You can start to work more broadly and put together programs of engagement and programs of community research and documentation. And as you sort of get quite far forward, you're then in a position where shocks to food supplies, shocks to water supplies and things like that may be something that will not mean catastrophe for your local community, but will be something that might bring you closer together. But all these things start with us being honest about where we are, supporting our local communities, and recognizing that there are greatest assets in adapting to this, protecting yourself and preserving your own ability to operate in your life and with the people around you, and seeking the support that you need to come to terms with some of these messages, and making choices in maybe a different way. So as we saw earlier, if you're one of the nodes that's far from the center and the center disappears, what is it in your community that is going to disappear with that? So that's quite a quick version of that. I think I was expecting more questions, but we can do a discussion now.
Yes, please, Geoff, and thank you very much for running us through that. You prompted a couple of questions within me, which the first is that you've come from a large centralized organization like DEFRA. Did working with them have a lot to do with your mindset that's saying that we can't do that any longer, we need to move to much more community-based stuff, or was there a lot of community-based stuff within DEFRA, did you find?
So I was funded by DEFRA, but I was working for the National Trust. So I've been working for the Trust for 8 years, but was only funded by DEFRA for 2. And yes, to both of those essentially is that the National Trust is a big, very large, very complex organisation that have a centralised need to standardise quite a lot of what they do, like a lot of big organisations do, and will move quite slowly on a lot of things, which can be very frustrating. But their heart's in the right place, and they do a lot of the right things. My role was to work in the community on in a very local context in the River Bure, in the catchment. So it's wherever the water hit the ground within that landscape was sort of our business, and we made it our business to make that as resilient a water cycle as possible in that catchment. So I worked with community groups who, who are already doing a lot of the organising and adaptation that we need to see across our landscape. And they're able to move quicker on because they don't have that organizational accountability. So on a sort of small to medium scale, that sort of centralized model slows that down. But the National Trust is a big organization, but it's by no means a country, and that we are still subject to the centralized controls of government and the centralized supply chains, centralized energy networks that make us as an organization vulnerable as well as one of those nodes that's subject to being downstream of a lot of the changes and the turbulence going on in the country and around the world. So there's a hyper local version, which is a good idea in any scenario, which is what I'm sort of talking about here.
Right. The next thing I had was I was reading an article this morning about the UK's agricultural budget, and a substantial chunk of it is going towards rebuilding our hedgerows. So there's a goal this year, I think, of redoing 1,500 kilometres of hedgerow, and they want to get it up to 10,000 within a year or three, which strikes me as being national money put towards local work, because each farmer that receives this money is going to have to work on his hedgerows. And I think a lot of them are doing this quite keenly. In fact, I think quite a substantial income for farmers nowadays is doing common good as provided by the government. So are you looking in your advice to people as to where they might be getting money from? Because a lot of them aren't going to be able to raise it locally. They're going to need some sort of national support. And I would have thought that something like the agricultural policy is potentially a very powerful assist. Do you see that tying in with your ideas?
So the next stage of this, I've not set up the CIC yet. Something to do in April, but the point of doing it is that I'll be able to bid for funds that can, because it's a community interest company. I would take a wage essentially, and then all the other money would go into whatever community projects are being run. So there is a lot around in terms of community funding. There's a lot that can be bid into at that small end, that sort of up to £20,000. There's a number of national things that you can do. There's a number of offset stuff that you can get involved in, things like BNG or nutrient neutrality in our area, biodiversity offsets for things. So stuff where you're sort of there's some organisations that are doing things that are a bit dirty and need to pay back, and you can take that money and do something particularly useful with it. But yeah, things like the National Lottery as well do community grants and community funds. They've got a new one. I've forgotten what it's called. It is around food security, and it's quite a big one actually. It's up to £5 million over 5 years, I think, somewhere around there. So there is a lot of that about. As a landowning or a land use CIC, which I will be, the area of land where I'll be doing forest edge design and workshops and education about how to use perennial planting schemes to do low input or low maintenance, productive and biodiverse gardens. That plot of land will have a single business identifier, an agricultural number, where I'll be able to claim capital grants for things like fencing to keep deer off the strawberries or whatever. So there are things like that. There are ways around that. So it's fine, and farmers have a ton of that knowledge as well. By the way, if you're in a rural community, farmers are definitely a group that need to be engaged with a lot of this stuff, as they have a lot of knowledge. First and foremost, they are multidisciplinary sort of experts, so they have to be engineers, mathematicians, business people, chemists. They have to know all of this stuff. So there is a lot they do know. They're a very, very useful group of people that currently need an awful lot of help, because that subsidy money that you were talking about, whilst it does, a lot of it goes towards that common good, or that whatever the term is. It is a far smaller lump of money than it used to be, and it won't be enough to protect the good interventions that they've done so far on their farms to protect nature and biodiversity and the quality of water entering our rivers. A lot of that will become undone because of the changes to agricultural subsidies, and the fact that a lot of them are producing sort of commodity goods, sugar, or carbohydrates to go into international supply chains, or they're growing biofuels or something where they're in a long chain at the wrong end of it, and they're not getting a good deal on it. But like I was saying about these horticulturalists and small scale growers, they can make a living for themselves off of a very small area, and farmers and these people don't talk typically. They're in two very different spheres. And it's very important to what I've been trying to do is mix that conversation up a bit, and that's where that change in land use is a real necessary push. Sorry, I
Bearing
think
in
I
mind that,
wandered quite far off of your question there, Graham.
yes, bearing in mind that your audience is largely parish and community councils and organizations, do you see a lot of funding nowadays that is specifying you need to be a community interest company or a community land trust or something? Is there an advantage to all of these organizations becoming CICs or CLTs or C somethings?
The benefit to the CIC model or structure is that you can operate as a business and you can operate charitably. So it means that, as I think at this level, and I don't fully understand the structure yet, I'm still at that end of it where I'm taking advice from people without fully understanding what it is I'm hearing. So at this end of it, I can bid into charitable funds because that money is spent charitably, and what I get is a wage. So I think what you're not allowed to do in CICs is be, skim off as much profit as you feel like, and that's just a business. So what you get to do in a CIC is bid into funds and have profit, work that you do that is paid for. So some of the work I'm going to be doing is things like conservation grazing, and that money will go into the CIC, and I will receive my wage as part of that. So what
If
that
you are working in the
allows,
county interest, yeah.
yeah, what that allows me to do is have a diversity of income streams, so it makes me more resilient. Um, there is, I think, with CICs, I think there's charitable incorporated organisations, and I can't remember what the other covenant, something else using the word incorporated, and then charities. What you can do with all of those is bid into charitable funds. There are very few structures along that charitable spectrum that don't allow you to bid into those funds. But then, obviously, being a business, you can support your own charity work by just doing paid for gigs.
Yeah. Sign of the times. In a previous life, I was a CIO myself, but it had a different meaning then. Peter, you're a guy with a hand up.
Yes, just one word of somebody who runs a CIC. You will have to pay corporation tax, so bear that in mind. It came as a bit of a surprise when we set up a CIC in Cambridgeshire. But my question really is, um, what you've been saying is a lot of local communities have lots of groups doing lots of things very similar to what you were saying doing. So I'm trying to kind of understand what actually is the added value that you would actually be able to offer a local group in that respect.
Is to bring them together essentially, and provide some guidance and some knowledge around how best to use their resources. One of the examples that I put in the slides and I can send out to people is the Felbeck Trust that operate in North Norfolk, and I work with them, so I'm a volunteer with them. And the project that we're running, our most recent project, is a catchment scale. So again, over the Bure catchment scale, conservation, restoration, and that's using the local nature recovery strategy map to target areas of particular interest to develop links between existing habitats in the catchment. So this group is me and three other people. We go and ground truth what we can see on these maps and what we understand has already been put in place by farmers, community groups, and private individuals, and we go and find things that are also that could also provide that link in that habitat. So things like churchyards and church grounds, grazing paddocks, hedges, particularly tall, particularly big trees, or areas of scrub or undermanaged stuff, or areas that farmers have put into stewardship. And then we find the gaps again and connect those gaps with local communities. We educate the local communities in what's best to go in that gap, what we know isn't there, what could be there, and how that benefits the wildlife in your local area, how that benefits you as a community,
So
and
are you
we
are you actually being paid to do that at the present moment, or are you doing
this
it on a voluntary basis?
this is voluntary at the moment.
Right. I mean, there is a similar scheme which the Cambridgeshire County Council are running present moment, which is nature recovery from the ground up.
Yeah.
Um, they don't well, they don't currently have any money available to do it, but would you from what you're currently doing, are you able to access or know of sources of funding to be able to do these things? Which we are. I'm actually very much involved in the kind of East Cambridgeshire kind of area, doing something very similar. But where are the sources of funding to make this happen? Do you
If
have
it's
access to
nature,
those?
if it's nature recovery, there should be nationally available sources of funding through species recovery funds. So that was Natural England's last round of funding. I think expressions of interest went in late last year. I think that's the main source of funding for it. Um,
Yes, I mean
there are,
there's very likely to be kind of because under the Environment Act of 2020, One, I mean, that's why the local nature recovery strategies and plans were developed as a national government requirement. But at the present moment, I'm not aware of any funding that is available from national government, nor for that matter is the county council aware of it at this moment.
Yeah, there has been a drop off, and similarly in the way that agricultural money has dropped off, so public sector money for that sort of stuff has dropped off. I think they're hoping to stimulate private investment by doing that. I mean, that's just my reading of it, is that that's expected that private investment, things like carbon credits, that are going to take over and going. But biodiversity net gain legislation is being gutted currently, so that's going to no longer be a source of income for people, we expect, but we don't know. But there's also things like I think in East Cambridgeshire you'd have the Cambridge Water money, so they're spending a lot of money at the moment on protecting the landscapes and the
Well,
hydrology.
actually, we're in no, it's not Cambridge Water, it's actually Anglian Water, and there are funds, quite a lot of funds available, as there would be for you in Norfolk, in particular
Yeah,
around water catchment areas. You know,
there's some of the bigger
they are
funds at the moment.
targeted towards specific things,
Yeah,
which I think make it
there's
slightly
some of
more
the bigger
attractive.
funds at the moment that will deal with land use change and community. So there's a Flourishing Communities Fund through Anglian Water, well, not through Anglian Water, but through a Cambridge-based organisation. And there's the AWINEP, which is their Advanced Water Framework Improvements
Yes,
Fund.
yeah,
Which,
yeah. I mean, I'm all aware of those that actually actively involved because we're looking at those, but it does depend upon. For example, I mean, we're looking at the kind of rare chalk streams, which do exist in East Cambridgeshire as well as South Cambridgeshire and Cambridge City, and going into Suffolk as well. And we've looked at all the Anglian Water kind of or Ofwat funded funds in that respect. They don't actually really include funding towards sampling uh, and looking at kind of what can be done. The next stage on, once there's been samples and one sampling of the water and there's identification of where there are issues, whether it's runoff from farmers or whether it's issues from runoff from outfall, then there might actually be funding. But the actual is that there's a limited amount of funding available for doing looking at sampling rivers and streams in that respect at the present moment.
yeah.
Can we move a bit further west, please? And Jane from Milton Keynes.
Yeah, hi Geoffrey. Yeah, that's really interesting presentation. I picked up some nice little words there. I love that. What was it, ground truthing or something? Really nice. So just to move the conversation a little bit, I was interested in the idea about doing desk surveys. So I am admin person for a Milton Keynes Climate Action Network, and I've talked about doing asset mapping before, but not really, only done it with the people that have come to be members of the network. I just wondered, how you found, how much response did you get and how wide, did you manage to get your survey out there? And then secondly, would you be willing to share your survey so I don't have to reinvent the wheel and I can adapt it?
Well, when I say desktop surveys, a little bit like so I did desktop surveys as with biodiversity projects, where you'd delineate an area and then get every record from between a certain time period within that area, and it's
Okay.
sort of it's a lot easier with biodiversity because you're just looking at the records that people have definitely made. With community stuff, it's looking at all sorts of sources. So probably, as you're already aware, not that information isn't all in one place. You have to go looking quite deeply through the internet, and quite a lot of it is on things like message boards, Facebook groups, and things like that. So it's by survey, I sort of mean a desktop
Yeah.
mine, mining the
Yeah.
internet for what's available. But I did find with our local one that there was a lot more of what I was interested in before 2020. So before COVID, a lot of this stuff that we had what I was interested in seed sovereignty, and we had East Anglian Grain Alliance, who were growing or like putting money towards local farmers to grow heritage grains that were then going to Leathering Set Mill, I want to say, in North Norfolk near Holt, which is a heritage mill, and then that was going to local bakeries around North Norfolk. And there was, so I went out to try to find all these bakeries, and none of them are there anymore. And Leathering Set Mill do still mill, but they've lost their connection to the heritage grains. So there's stuff that is still kicking around on the internet that's not actually there. So
Okay.
that's what I mean by ground truthing a bit. And
Right.
in terms of the sort of habitat stuff, as I was saying in the previous answer, was that there are a lot of interventions. There are a lot of things that people do privately in their own back gardens or their own communities that are very good and just don't get logged anywhere, don't get mapped, don't get recorded. And a lot of the mapping software that's available for habitats and species and conditions and things all run from similar databases. Not all of them are up to date, and to be able to read satellite imagery over a period of years is a very different skill set. So there is, it can be fairly easy to say, all right, okay, in this few square miles of my local area, it looks like there is a bit of wet woodland here, a bit of coppice there. There's a low acid grassland over here. I'll go out and see if that's actually what's there, or whether someone's mown it or cut it all down. And you might find that some of it's missing. You might find that there's a lot more there that's not mapped. And there's stuff that farmers have put in under stewardship schemes that haven't gone on simply because that's a different data set. So that's sort of what I was getting at. I don't have any in terms of the desktop survey stuff. The only thing I have really is a report from the Riverlands project on the community listening that I did. So as part of the ground truthing, I went out to find these people and spoke to them, understood their businesses, their organizations, what their needs were, what their challenges were, and what they needed. In some circumstances, because I had community grant fund money through the project, I was able to offer them grant fund money to carry on or to expand what they were doing, and that opened doors to other conversations. Or I would have to go along to meetings in pubs in the evenings, or go on to talks or events in village halls and that sort of stuff. So being local to go out and do that stuff is really important. And just try to find those people and have the conversations. I think that's where a lot of this comes in, is that it's essentially a leadership thing. If there's a group of people that want to move in that direction of adaptation, what it takes is a lot of conversations with people, because there's a complex issue and there's complex issues surrounded by complex issues. So you need to be able to have long form conversations that are led by the curiosities and the anxiety of people that you're talking to. So it's important to be face to face as often as possible on these things.
I love the
Yeah,
idea that you're
thank you.
creating a job description that requires you for research to go down the local pub quite frequently. Well done, good move.
Yeah, it's a dream, isn't it? Living the dream.
Let's continue moving further south, and it's Sue in Battle, please.
Yeah, hi everybody. So couple of so I'm coming from parish council perspective. And so first of all, how do you and maybe others feel that the message that we can't carry on as we are, who and how is that going to be portrayed to people? Because I'm on our town council, what we're still trying to do is reduce our footprint. What can we do to support organisations that are caring about the environment, caring about carbon, and working on a day-to-day basis? And even that can be hard work to get your fellow councillors to agree, actually, we do really need a renewable energy source as against any energy company. Even that gets debated. having passed a climate emergency, etc., etc. Then my second part of the question of my point is about we in Battle, and I expect most town and parish councils have got some sort of resilience plan, but that's about what do we do when there's an emergency, and what do we do if there I don't know, whatever. Yeah, the water goes down, and at the moment the solution is hand out bottles and make sure everybody knows where the car park is. But what we're saying today, and Geoffrey, you talked about, is actually saying that this is going to happen. There is going to be a shortage of water. How can we, food is a better example because there are more things we can do about it. And how do we move it ahead from a town council perspective of the actions? When we're short of resources, everything has to be planned a year ahead. It's hard work to make good inroads.
Yeah, but that's a similar set of issues that I'm facing with our local emergency group, who are sort of they're just outside the council, so they have one of the town councils sitting on the board for it. So it's sort of a similar thing. There was a lot of focus on carbon footprint and recycling, and it's incredibly popular as a volunteer organisation. I've not seen so many people turn up to a board meeting where they weren't actually going to do all the things they normally volunteer for. So I was really impressed with the amount of people that were there and that wanted to do something, and a little bit disheartened that they were focusing on what are essentially dealing with the problems of the consumer sort of supply chains that we're sort of stuck in. So, what do we do with the waste that we're forced to buy in, our food packaging and things like that? We're forced to buy this stuff and then we have to do something with it. A lot of it isn't recyclable, and these people are trying to figure this out and reinvent a new way of doing something with this stuff, and spending a lot of time and effort on it. And the council will go along and they'll listen, and they will say what you've said is that, in order to do this, so we have to take it to that board, we have to take it to that group, we'll have to find funding, and a lot of these things, the wheels turn, and things change, and often it's a no at the other end. I think what I would like to talk to that group about, and I'll be taking this, I was supposed to give them this presentation about 2 months ago, but they spent so long talking about recycling I didn't have time. So that sort of underlines my issue a little bit. But what I'm going to suggest to them is that they may not be focusing on the things that will fail first in the community. I think the honest sort of truth about where we are, I put that author right at the beginning, Jem Mendel. There's a few of them about, and they're coming out of the woodwork quite quickly at the moment with everything going on. But there are a lot of authors that will give you a very a very comprehensive view of why it is that you should be focusing on local solutions and making local relationships with people and building that trust with people. And it's because of these collapse issues. And when collapse happens and people don't recognize their neighbor, then that's a situation we don't want to imagine, really. What I want our local group to do is to start to look at the vulnerable areas in the community, the vulnerable people who are going to be the first to be subject to price hikes in energy and food, who are going to sort of suffer first in that, and see and try to figure out something to do for them and engage with them. Once there is that groundswell of support, that there is a need, a solution that needs to come from a local government, then you can lobby with a lot more people. But it's very easy for a local government to ignore one or two people from what they would look at as a niche group, I would have thought.
So in terms of catching people's attention and overcoming reluctance to make a decision, are you familiar with the National Emergency Briefing movie that's coming out next month?
Yes, yeah, I'm putting on a
Because you
screening.
really need to get hold of that and show that to your people, because I suspect you'll find that there's a lot more interest suddenly being taken care of what happens next.
Yeah, we're doing a screening. I took the
It's,
logo out of the presentation. Actually, I put it in earlier today and then took it out in favour of something else.
it's
But yes,
well,
we're
Sue,
putting on
if you
a
come into the
screening.
knowledge base, Sue, and search for National Emergency Briefing, it's in there. But
Yeah,
basically, you can sign up to get a copy of the film sent to you. It's being released, I think, on April the 7th is their target date.
Could somebody put in the chat the book that you mentioned earlier, please?
I can send all the links to Graham, who
It'll all
can.
go up into the knowledge base, Sue.
Thank you.
And Stuart, your turn, please.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I realise we've run out of time. I would just like to thank Geoffrey. It's a very interesting talk and a lot to think about. But I think my main problem is trying to get momentum from other people. We have quite a few local groups who are doing, say, gardening, local beekeepers, local this, that, and the other. But they don't tend to come together or work together. They're all in a little silo. Me as a councillor trying to get the public more involved in this is proving very difficult. I only seem to get a big reaction from our local community if we're putting up car parking fees or we're doing a bit of development, which they don't want. Then they all come out of the woodwork, but trying to get them together and act together on projects like this, I find very difficult.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. And I had a similar issue with the Riverlands project, is that we had really good engagement with our land use and soil health stuff that we were putting out around the catchment, except for in one area, and it was in the village in the catchment that had the lowest income, had the highest disability PIP claims and things like that. So I think there was spoke to an issue that I've dealt with before in sort of areas where it's specific, more in areas where there's deprivation, but quite generally in a lot of places where there are a lot of people that don't have the time, don't have the bandwidth, the psychological bandwidth to deal with new things right now, and they don't have that that motivation that a lot of people that I think Transition Cambridge are great, and transition movement's great, but does suffer from that sort of middle class priority list of things to do, and the lower down that economic income scale that you go, the more you're dealing with keeping your head above water, and you're dealing with your immediate issues, immediate problems. And I think if we look at how to solve those immediate problems, or to support them, or to bring messages along with some of that support, then I think we'll get a lot more traction on this stuff. One of the projects that I ran in North Cambridgeshire was an edible park. We called it a forage orchard in the end. The idea was that it was supposed to, we put in a load of fruit trees and nut trees, other things, forageable species, into a design that we didn't have to do any maintenance on, and then invited the community to tell us what else they wanted to plant. What do you like to eat? And come out and we'll plant it all together. And the message was, we're giving you free food. This is free to access. You can go in and harvest it whenever you want. If you're local, you can nip out, get some herbs or get whatever, and it's free, healthy food. And we had more response from that. We had response from the local homeless charities, the food kitchens and food banks, and the charity that did outreach for the Eastern European community in that town, there's a massive problem with rough sleeping in that town. So that local charity did the outreach for us for that group, and we were able to bring a lot of different people together on that site. So I think free food is always a win. That's been a win with getting difficult to reach farmers out to engagement events as well. And I think food is one of those things that links us all together. So I'd start there. And I don't know, did Stuart say he was still here?
No, he's probably listening, but he's got someone coming into his room, I think.
No worries. So,
Andrew
It's all
Gregg's
right,
comment.
still here.
Okay.
I think that, I mean, food is a good place to start, but I think the general message of these texts that I'm drawing on is that we find those vulnerabilities in our communities, and we understand them, we understand what they need and how they're going to collapse, and that will generate support because it will start to take the pressure off of people. It might start to help support people with the immediate issues that are stopping them getting involved in other things. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, but I think for the vast majority, these things just don't impinge on them. The supermarket nearly always has food in it. The taps always work. The electricity is always on. What's all the fuss about?
Yeah, it's
Why
great
do you have insurance?
right now.
Stuart,
Yeah.
I was going to ask a question of children. Do you find that talking to the children and that they then badger their parents to get involved with these things, or is that not been tried?
It's not something I've tried, and having young children myself, I find it easier to put forward that message of restoration and being good to one another and doing the responsible thing. They're far more open to, well, this is the way the world should work, so let's make it work that way. So that's been quite a good way to get kids on side where I have worked with them, but it hasn't been a lot. I've got to be honest with that. That's a limitation of my experience in that, is that in my catchment, the demographic for what we were looking at, there was, children and young people were at were not very well represented in that. So we did some engagement, but not a lot.
I can't help feeling, though, that if you're going to try and get people to change the way they think and their expectations, one of the major issues I would like to see changed is the educational system, because I don't think it teaches people to start thinking these ways. They're not set in the right directions. Of course, you can always argue who's right and who's wrong, but
I totally agree with you. And a lot of these projects, I encourage my kids to come out to get involved in this stuff with me. We do tree planting together. We grow food in the garden. We do go out to. They come along to a lot of my work events as well, and they I want them to mix as much as possible with other generations, and I think that's really important. And one of the groups that does do that in our catchment are those small scale growers, the horticulturalists and the veg box schemes, and those people are, so they're on the bottom end of that income scale in terms of people that do land-based jobs. They're on minimum wage essentially. A lot of them are living in vans, but they take any advice and any support and any help they can get, and they do, and they spread their message as far and wide as possible to try to make that sector more resilient. And that involves a lot of outreach, a lot of education, a lot of open days, tours and visits and things. And so they do have a really good intergenerational mix.
I also think there's a ripple effect. I mean, your children interact probably with 100 kids at their school, and they'll interact with other people. And you're suggesting resilience and tree planting, and some other kid will come along and say, well, I think we should be focusing on clean water. And so it goes. So I do think that we ignore the children at our own risk, frankly, because they will spread the word for the next 20 years, and then their children will spread the word. And so you'll change people's culture if you start at the bottom end rather than the top. Anybody else for any questions, please? Well, we sort of had to shrink because of the time, I think. So thank you very much to all those of you who are still with us. Thank you, Geoff, for giving us the presentation. And as other people have written in the comment section, there's plenty there for you to think about, or for us to think about. If you could send me a copy of the presentation, please, I will get it up on the knowledge base where everyone can see it and share the links that you've got. Are the
Wonderful.
links
Yeah,
included in the presentation? They are.
they
Yes.
I had to put them
Yeah.
all back in last night. They'd all they'd all
Okay.
disappeared. But yes,
No,
they're in.
if you could send that, that'd be wonderful.
Will do.
And thank you all very much, and see you
Thank
those of
you.
us do next week. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.